Well, constitutional law specialist Bruce DelValle joins me now from Washington. So, Bruce, as we've just heard that Donald Trump is heading towards Atlanta. The court process is going to be fairly similar to any other person, but just walk us through what these changes actually are.
Well, what the difference in Georgia is, and what we saw, the difference we saw in the District of Columbia, even Florida or New York, in Georgia, everything happens in public. So it is going to be public. We're going to get to see him get fingerprinted. We're going to get to see him get his mugshot. We're going to get to see him make his initial appearance in answer to the charges of the indictment. And as you said, that there are 13 charges against President Trump, and there's 41 total charges and 19 total defendants. So we're going to get to see, the American public is going to get to see Mr. Trump standing in the Bailey, as it were, in England, and answer these charges. And I think that's going to be a remarkably different sort of public image thing than he's been used to. He's used to controlling the narrative, controlling his appearance, controlling where he appears and what is said. And now he doesn't have any control. Georgia is much different than the other jurisdictions. So he will show up, he will face he will get fingerprinted, he will get his mugshot taken, and he will face the judge and have the charges read against him, and a plea will be taken.
Well, you say that Georgia is different to other jurisdictions. Just expand on how this system is different from a state charge to a federal charge.
Well, that's a great question. That's the primary question. That's why, from a perspective of the law and constitutional law, this has to be quite worrisome to President Trump. President Trump cannot be pardoned if he gets convicted in Georgia by himself, if he becomes the president, or a subsequent president. Only an independent body, a pardon bureau board in Georgia can pardon someone for a crime that they've been convicted of. That's unlikely to happen. It's cumbersome. It's not as though one person can say, okay, you are done. Now, in the federal system, the president can pardon a criminal, a convicted criminal. But in state charges, especially in Georgia, where it's not the governor that pardons, unlike in New York and in Florida, it's a board. And so President Trump, if he gets convicted in Georgia, it's going to be very difficult for him to absolve or wash the slate clean. And each state approaches things differently. Georgia approaches things from the perspective of the public's right, that if you're accused of a crime, you have done something to harm the public good. And so the public has a right to see you brought to justice and brought to trial. And the trials are open to the public. The trials will likely be televised. So these are all things that have to factor into President Trump's thinking, that this is going to be perhaps the most serious of all of the charges and all of the proceedings against him.
Bruce, we just heard from John there in Atlanta, and as he says, Trump is one of the favorite candidates for the Republican Party, well, the favorite candidate. And he himself has repeatedly said that he's done no wrongdoing, and this is just simply a witch hunt by the Biden camp. So just talk us through what's going to be his defense.
Well, I think that's absolutely the best question that can be asked, and it's one that I don't think many people are asking. His best defense is, look, I had the right. I honestly believe that there was election fraud on a massive scale that infiltrated and damaged the democratic process. He's going to say, look, I believed that there was vote tampering, that there were irregularities, there were improprieties, there was miscounting, there were lost ballots, that there were problems with the voting system. That's part of the problem, Ms. Bates. When you try to in order to prove someone committed a crime, you have to prove that they had a criminal intent. It's called the mens rea. You have to allege and prove that they intended to commit a crime. They didn't accidentally do it. They intended to commit a crime, and they knew it was a crime when they were committing it, by and large. In this case, they're going to have to prove, the Georgia prosecutors in Fulton County, Ms. Willis, is going to have to show that President Trump knew that the things that he was saying was untrue, knew that none of these things had happened, that there had not been vote tampering in Coffee County, which, by the way, President Trump won by 80% of the vote, which is a little odd that he would go there with this Byzantine cloak and dagger scheme to actually conceal votes and take the votes away and have the ballots in hand, which is in itself a crime, and to tamper with computers, which is in and of itself a crime. And that he knew that all of this was false, and yet he did it anyway to subvert and pervert the election in the state of Georgia. So that's going to be a little bit hard for them to prove. If President Trump truly believed what he was doing was right and he was avenging the democratic process, it may be hard to convict him. Having said that, there are some things that you simply cannot believe. In the face of truth, in the face of reality, you cannot steadfastly stick by some ridiculous idea or concept. So that's the tension. That's where his issues will lie. He is probably going to try to present a First Amendment defense that he had the freedom of speech, he had the right to say the things he said. And the indictment is very well done. It's very well crafted. It's very impressive. But it, at some points, goes over the line. It kind of seeps past its own province and its boundaries. It gets ahead of itself. It attacks President Trump for saying things relating to issues on a national scale that are unrelated to Georgia. I don't think they had to do that. They made it a little bit more spectacular and a little bit more sexy, if you will. So that's going to be a little bit of a problem. But the real problem is this is a serious indictment. It is well thought out. It is well crafted. And I would suggest it's not overcharged like we see a lot of times in prosecutorial documents. This is going to be a very difficult case for President Trump to prevail.
Yes, it certainly is. And we're just actually seeing live pictures now of Trump walking off the plane, and he's walking into his car ready to head to Atlanta, Georgia, where he's going to attempt to reverse his, in connection to charges where he attempted to reverse his 2020 election loss in Georgia. So we're just seeing those live pictures. But going back to what you were saying, Bruce, if Trump has indeed done nothing wrong, as he so claims, then why are Republicans in the US House launching counter investigations on District Attorney Fani Willis, who is actually tasked with investigating Trump before he's ever surrendered? Can this really be interpreted as obstructing justice itself?
Well, that would be a little bit of a stretch. Certainly, Congress is free to explore and investigate anything that it puts its mind to. And in this case, Congressman Jim Jordan is following what's now a familiar trope. It's become a bit of a tiresome one. That is, that this is all a politically motivated prosecution. And that's not an artificial thing. That's a real thing. We see around the world where the powers in power go after the former administrations and the former leaders and use the court system and the legal system and the police state to accomplish those goals. So it is a thing. I just don't think it's a thing, and heaven forbid it's a thing in the United States. It's not something that we do or have ever done. So for President Trump, that's the drum that he's been beating. And so some members of Congress are taking up that drum. I don't have a real problem with him investigating Miss Willis, rather. I think that she has to know that she's going to set herself up for that. But I think she's done a good job of maintaining above the fray and not talking too much in the press and trying to promote herself through this indictment, unlike the gentleman in New York with the Stormy Daniels indictment. That's blatantly and transparently, he's applying for another job. That's the weakest of all the issues facing President Trump. I suspect that one may be thrown out at any time. But this one, Ms. Willis is doing a pretty good job of staying quiet, sticking to the facts, and not trying to promote herself or an agenda. And that makes it very difficult to maintain that argument that President Trump is constantly maintaining, that he's a victim, he's a martyr. And Jim Jordan in Congress, they're not exactly falling in line with that argument, but they're looking into it. And that's to be expected. It's become, sadly, part of the playbook. It's the us against them mentality, the red team versus the blue team that American politics have devolved into.
Well, as you say, Bruce, this isn't his only indictment. This is his fourth set of charges being brought by prosecutors within a space of 5 months. So does it affect any of the other cases filed against him?
Well, what I think we're going to see, and that's once again a very brilliant question, I think we're going to see Jack Smith has the other indictments, and he's pursuing his own course, and he's kind of going at a slower pace. I would not be surprised if the Fulton County court does not try this case in October or November. Jack Chesborough, one of the attorneys that has been indicted, pled not guilty, and yesterday the court set his trial date to begin on October 23rd. Yes, that October 23rd, a couple of months from now. So I would not be surprised if this court does not put the foot on the gas and say, let's hurry up and wrap this up. Let's try this case as soon as we possibly can, because the accused has a right to speedy trial. And that's the Speedy Trial Act. It's based upon the idea that the accused cannot languish in prison for years and years without a trial. It is generally thought to favor the accused. In this case, it may be used instead of a shield to protect the accused, it may be used as a sword to get the accused to trial as quickly as possible. Now, of course, President Trump's team is going to try very hard to delay it, saying there's a lot of documents, there's a lot of moving parts here, and they need more time to prepare for trial. So that's where the interplay between this case and the other cases comes in at its strongest point. That's the point of the spear. This case may take over and be in the driver's seat in terms of driving the bus on how quickly these things get down the road and how quickly we see President Trump sitting in a trial.
Well, just lastly, Bruce, I know you say that there's most likely going to be a speedy trial, but before that, what restrictions imposed on him, if any, pending the trial? How many will there be, and how severe?
Well, I mean, they can say anything. They've already said that he's to stay off social media and he's not to contact any of his co-defendants. And his co-defendants happen to be in his inner circle, his coterie of his closest people. So he can't contact them because witnesses can't get together, co-defendants can't get together and settle on the story and come up with a story. They have to go in and tell the truth and tell their truth. So that's already been placed upon him, that restriction, a significant restriction. And keeping President Trump off of social media is going to be a very difficult thing. Now, the interesting thing is going to be, Ms. Bates, is what happens when he violates the judge's order. And he's sitting in Florida or New Jersey, and the Georgia officials can't really arrest him in Florida and New Jersey without the cooperation of the local officials there, which may be somewhat difficult. But he will be severely restricted. They've already indicated they're going to severely restrict him. They may put travel restrictions on him. That's usual and customary. If they're going to treat him like others, he will have to surrender his passport. And he may have some restrictions on what he does. He doesn't drink, but there may be restrictions on alcohol use, certainly on drug use. He may have to submit to drug testing or alcohol testing. Those are common things that defendants have to face when they're out on bail. And in this case, he will be out on bail. It's $200,000 bail. So there are going to be some restrictions. This is not going to be a garden party for him. So if President Trump thinks this is just another in a never-ending commercial of his martyrdom on his way to the White House, I think he's going to be quickly shaken back into a reality, because this is different. The states are different than the federal system. Generally, we think of the federal system as being much tougher. But in some cases, in some states, they are much tougher on the restrictions on the accused during bail. And I think Georgia, and I know Georgia is definitely one of those states. I practiced in Georgia. I was a member of the Georgia Bar for a number of years. So Georgia treats things very, very differently. They look at things differently. And they're not different from most states, especially throughout the South. As I said, the idea is if you've committed a crime, you've done something to harm the citizens of that state, and the citizens of that state have a right to see you brought to justice, and they have a right to observe the process of you being brought to justice. So I think that's where Mr. Trump finds himself, President Trump finds himself tonight.